will continue at 2 o'clock. So let us continue. So I was telling you yesterday that there are different benefits of scripts. For example, the main important usage of scripts is that they basically link the events together, right? So some kind of causal relationship is established between multiple events in a link, in a script. So for example, if you are talking about a cricket match script, we studied that in yesterday's class. So if it is a cricket match script, then the different events like entering into the stadium, then entering into the ticket line, then basically seeing the match, then ordering some snacks, then exiting. So all these are basic events which are involved in watching a cricket match, right? Now, apart from these, each of these event is basically a main event, and in which there will be sub events. So all these sub events are basically having a causal relationship to each other, that one event is basically causing the other, right? So this is basically the meaning of causal relationship between multiple events in a script. Now, every script also has an entry condition that will activate the script. So for example, if you want to watch the cricket match, then the precondition would be that you should basically be interested to watch, and then you should have some money in order to buy the ticket. So these are the preconditions in order to activate that particular script. And for each event to take place also, you should have a prerequisite. So that prerequisite is that the event just before it has happened, then only the next event will be triggered, right? So these are the different benefits of script. And we had done one script. For example, this cricket match script we had done in yesterday's class. So this was the script for cricket match. Now let us do a restaurant script. So one script example I had taken. Now let us take another example just to tell you that what is the different type of scripts and how you write different type of scripts. So in a restaurant script, the name would be restaurant, right? And the track would be a particular restaurant, like it is a coffee shop, or it's an ice cream parlor, or it's a food court, or it's a burger outlet. What is it exactly? So the category of restaurant will come in the track. So coffee shop is basically the category of that restaurant, or you can say a more specific variation on the general script restaurant. Then we have props. So props are basically your supporting items in the script. For example, your menu. Menu is a main part of a restaurant, because without a menu, restaurant cannot work. So that is the main thing. So menu is one item inside, a menu is one item which participates in the script. Then you have table, chairs, and then food. Food is also an important item if you are talking about a restaurant. Then money, because the person should have money in order to buy the food. And then some check. Check is basically your check leaves, basically your checkbook. And if you want to sign a check in order to pay, then you can use that check. So check, menu, tables, food, money, all these are the supporting items. So they are props. And the roles. Roles are basically your people involved in the script. So people could be a customer, right? Customer could be the person involved in the script. Then the waiter, who is basically bringing the menu and serving you food. Then cook, and then your owner of the restaurant, and the cashier, to whom you are paying the bill in the billing line. So these are different people, and these are the main people involved when you are dealing with a restaurant, right? So these become the roles, right? So then we have entry conditions. So if you want to go to a restaurant, or if you want to activate this script, then basically the customer should be hungry. So that is the first precondition. He should be hungry, then only he will go to eat something. And he should have money, because he wants to buy, so he should have money. So these are the two entry conditions. And the exit conditions or the results would be your S has less money, so you are calling customer as S, and different symbols you are giving for different people. So customer is S, so S has less money after he goes out of the restaurant. Then O has more money. O is the owner, so he has given the money to owner, so owner will have more money now. And S is not hungry because he's eaten, and S is pleased. Now S is pleased is optional, because if the food is not good, then he may not be pleased also. So that is why we have just placed it as an optional result. So these are the different basic components of the script. And now we have the leftover component is the scenes. So this is the most important, you can say the most important component of a script. So you have different scenes when you have when you want to write a script, you have different scenes in it. So the main scenes is the main events of the script are called as scenes, and the sub events inside that each scene that will be written inside that scene. Okay, for example, so basically we start with the scene number 1. So the customer enters the restaurant, so this is the entering scene. And then he will order, so the ordering scene is the main scene. Then he will eat, so that is the main scene, and then he will exit. So that is the basic events. So entering, ordering, eating, and exiting. So now the sub events in each of these actions, or you can say the scenes. So scene 1 is entering. So if he wants to enter, he will have to go into the restaurant. So we have to basically write that particular sentence that the customer is going into the restaurant. We have to write that in a conceptual dependency notation or a semi-formal conceptual dependency notation. So we write it like this. We just identify the primitive actions involved in this particular sentence, and then we identify the subject and object of the sentence, and the remaining sentence we write it in a normal English language only. But actually the thing is, if you want to represent it in a proper in a 100% correct format, then the pure correct format is you should represent everything in a conceptual dependency notation using those 14 rules of CD representation, right? So we start with, just because we don't want to focus on how to convert a sentence into CD representation, because that we already know, we have discussed it. So that is why I'm writing these sentences in a semi-formal way. But if you want, you can convert them into each and every sentence into CD representation. So first one is, as customer is going into the restaurant, so subject is S, and going means transfer of a physical location. So that is a P trans, the primitive action is P trans for that. So P trans, and then he is going himself, means he is walking actually. So he is not transferring something else, he is transferring the same thing. So object is also S. So S P trans S into the restaurant. So that means that he is going into the restaurant. And then S is customer is looking to the table. So S attend eyes to the tables. So attend means he is looking. So that is the primitive action for looking. So customer is looking on the table. So he is attending his eyes to the tables. Now he decides, where should I sit? So for that, for deciding, we have the primitive action mBuild, right? So that is why S mBuild, where to sit. So the customer is deciding where to sit. Okay, so now after he has decided, he will move to that particular position, or you can say to that particular table. So that is why we have written SP trans S to the table. So this means that he is going towards the table, right? Then finally he is sitting. So towards the table he has reached, but now he is basically adjusting the chair and towards the exact sitting position. So he is moving himself to the sitting position. So that is why we have written S, move S to the sitting position. Fine. So basically this completes our scene 1, and in scene 1 we are actually entering into the restaurant, and then we are deciding where to sit, and then finally we have sat there. Okay, so that is the events which have happened now in scene 1. These have already happened. Now in scene 2 he has to order. Okay, so he has to order. So there are two options here, two cases actually, that the waiter, basically the menu is already there on the table, or he asked the waiter to bring the menu. So waiter is bringing the menu. So there are two cases. One case is that he is that the menu is already there on the table. So customer starts ordering. He calls the waiter and starts ordering. Other option is that the waiter is basically bringing the menu because customer asked. Then he brings the menu and then the customer orders. So let us see both the cases. On the left hand side, if you see, this is basically this is the case where menu is already there on the table. So S P trans menu to S. So he's basically taking the menu towards himself. Customer. S is the customer. So P trans is transferring of the physical location of an object, and the object is menu. And if you write P trans menu to S, it is basically the thing that he is taking that particular menu towards himself. So it depends upon your It depends upon your CD representation, that who is the source and recipient of that particular object, that the meaning of this primitive action P trans will change. So it will not be like going, S is not going anywhere, it is taking the menu towards itself. So it depends upon that how do you represent, and what are the source and recipients of your this particular menu object, then your P trans meaning will change accordingly. So in this case, when you represent it in a CD format, you will have to represent that it is basically the sources. So basically, your source and destination is same, but the object is menu. Basically, or you can say, you can use basically that rule which talks about the physical source and destination of an object, right? So in this, basically your rule which tells about the physical source and destination of an object. So that was rule number 9, I guess. In that you had basically, you can write that it was initially the menu was at some position X and now it is towards the destination is S, like this. So then you will basically be able to represent this sentence that he has taken the menu from a position X towards himself. So depending upon the application of that rule, which tells you the physical source and destination, that physical source is the location X and destination is S. So depending upon that representation, your P trans meaning will change, that he is taking it towards himself. So now he has taken the menu, and then this arrow, this line indicates the next step. So the next step is S M trans W to the table. Okay. So S M trans means telling. M trans is the primitive action for telling, right? So S tells W is waiter. So S is customer. So S M trans W to table. So he is now asking the waiter to come to the table. Customer is asking the waiter to come to the table. So that's why it is written S M trans W to table, means S tells waiter to come to table. Then after he is coming, he is deciding what food he should order. So for deciding, we have M build. So S M build, choice of F. F is the food. Okay, F is food. So he is deciding the choice of F. Now once he is decided, he will basically signal the waiter that okay, now you can come. So basically, initially he has asked him that this is the table on which I want to order. This is the table which needs an order, and then he is giving the signal to the waiter that okay, now come. So then he is telling the signal to waiter. Then waiter is coming. So now waiter P trans waiter to table. So basically that means W P trans W means he is going towards the table, right? Now when he is coming to he came to the table, then he will tell, S will tell customer. So S M trans I want F to W. I want F means I want food. So this is the sentence which he is saying. I want food to the waiter. Okay. So S M trans I want F to the waiter. So he is telling that he wants some food. Okay. So this is one thing for which you will also have to represent this relationship that I want food. This sentence also you'll have to represent in a CD format. Okay. So everything. So is this sentence S M trans something to the waiter? So that will be a CD representation, and in that you will have another CD representation embedded that will talk about I want food. Okay. So that will also talk about that I want food and who is saying to whom, the source and recipient of this, or you have to check the corresponding rules to represent this sentence. Now he's saying that I want food to the waiter. The next thing is W P trans W to C. C is the cook. So he's going waiter. He is telling, he has already told customer that I want food. So he has given that particular order. Now the waiter is going to the cook. So that is what is written over here, W P trans W to C. So waiter is going to the cook, and then he is telling to the cook, W M trans to the cook. Okay, he is telling that this is the food you have to prepare. Now that cook is A trans is basically giving the taking the food also. It's basically telling to the cook and taking the food also. A trans F is written in the brackets. That means once the cook has prepared the food, then he will take that food also. So in case that food is not available, then the right hand side of this action would get activated. So WM trans to C, and C can also say that that food is not available. Cook can say that thing. So on the right hand side, you see here C do, on the left hand side it is the option that if there is no food. On the right hand side it is the normal case. So C do prepare F. So preparing the food may be another script. So it can be that the case that the preparing food is another script, so it can get activated at that time. So basically, students, there is one important thing over here, that inside a script there can be a link towards another script also. So it may happen that one script can activate another script also. That can happen. So here we are considering that preparing food is another big event. For that we can also generate another script. So that is why we have written prepare F script. So in this case it will get activated, and we don't know what it is. We have not actually detailed that script, but it is the preparing food script. Okay. Now the left hand side case is the abnormal case where food is not present. So cook will tell that no food is there to the waiter. So CM trans no food to the waiter, and the waiter will tell this to the customer. So waiter goes to the customer. So WP trans W to S. Now WM trans no food to S. So he is telling no food to customer, and then customer has the option that he can choose another option of food, or otherwise he can just leave the restaurant. Okay, so that is why go back to star. Star, that is a star. Okay, if I zoom it, you will understand that it is written go back to star. Okay, so star is star. If you see on the previous on the previous event, it is written S M build choice of F. So there is that star placed. So it will go back to star and start again building the choice of food, and again he will order. Otherwise, he will go to scene 4 at the no pay path, and he will just exit. Okay, so this is the case when there is no food. So this is the case when menu was already there on the table, right? But if menu is not on the table, then you see in the scene 2 ordering on the start in the top of this scene 2 ordering on the just right hand side, if you see, S is asking for menu. Just see on the topmost side of scene 2, on the right, top right. On the top right, it is written S asks for menu. So those are the events which are involved when there is no menu on the table. So we have to consider that case also. So that is why it is written S is asking for menu. So S M trans signal to waiter. So he is giving a signal to waiter. Then waiter comes to the table. So WP trans W to the table. Then S is telling need menu to waiter. So S M trans need menu to waiter. Then waiter is coming with the menu. So waiter is going to the menu. So WP trans W to menu. So waiter is actually going to the location of menu. Then the next event is WP trans W to table. Now he has reached the menu. So now he is bringing the menu to the table. So that is why it is written WP trans W to table. And then WA trans menu to S. So A trans means giving or taking depending upon who is the source and recipient. So in this case, it is giving. So WA trans menu to S. So he is giving the menu to customer. And now we have the normal events which had occurred in the normal case. So that is why we have linked it to the next step is basically the same common step. So S M trans W to table and so on. So these were some set of separate events which would occur if the menu is not on the table. So we have created a separate link, and then we have through these lines we have just connected it to the common set of events. Now, after this scene 2 was involving many events because the food may be present, may not be present in that restaurant, and the menu may be there on the table or may not be there. So that is why we had different branches of this. You can say a tree kind of a structure. Now, finally, when you come to the end of scene 2, then it is basically that he has ordered, okay, and then he is eating, right? So scene 3 is eating scene. So in this scene 3, his cook is basically giving the food to waiter. So CA trans food to the waiter, and then waiter is giving the food to customer. So WA trans food to customer. So cook gave to waiter, waiter gave to customer, and then customer is eating. So S in just F. So ingest means eating. So customer is eating the food. Now he can order more food also after eating. So there's another option. We can return to scene 2. So that is why we have placed it like an option, return to scene 2 to order more. Otherwise you go to the exit scene number 4. So if he orders more, it will again go to scene number 2 and it will go on. Otherwise it will come to, in the end, it will come to scene number 4, which is the exiting scene. So if you see the exiting scene, in the exiting scene, it is basically he can basically ask the waiter to write a check, basically to bring the check where he can sign and give the money. Otherwise, he can pay to the cashier also. So just see here, W move write check. So W is the waiter. Waiter is moving something, or something he's writing on the check. He is basically writing the amount on the check or something like that. Then waiter is going to the customer. So WP trans W to S, because waiter is going to the customer, and then WA trans check to S. So he's giving that check to the customer, and then S is A trans tip to waiter. So S is giving some tip so to the waiter. So A trans means giving. So S customer gives some tip to the waiter, and then SP trans S to M. M is your cashier. Okay. So S is going to the cashier, and then S A trans money to M. So S is giving money to the cashier, and then S finally he's paid actually. So then he'll go out of the restaurant. So SP trans S out of the restaurant. So he's going out of the restaurant. So this is basically your um, situation where he has paid and he is basically going. Fine. And on the right hand side, if you see, there is another one action is written S M trans to the waiter. He is basically waiter is not coming. He is himself going to the waiter. And W A trans check to S. So this is the option where he is going himself to the waiter to take that checkbook. Okay. So he's telling to the waiter, and waiter is basically giving the check to the customer. And then finally the normal option that he is writing something and then he's giving it to the waiter, to the customer, and customer is paying to the cashier, and so on. So it's basically your check, maybe your bill also. It may be a bill also, that he's asking for a bill. So he's writing the bill and giving it to the customer. Then customer is paying the money to the cashier. Or it may be the case that customer is himself telling the waiter. So actually here the two options are, the left hand side option is that waiter is coming himself with the bill. The right hand side option is that customer is asking for the bill, or you can say the check where the amount is written. So SM trans to W means customer is telling to the waiter that this is customer is telling to the waiter that please bring the check. And the left hand side, W move the right check. He is basically directly also he can come with a bill. Sometimes you ask from the waiter, sometimes he directly comes to you without asking also. So those are the two options possible. And then finally customer goes out of the restaurant. So this finishes your, so basically this is the last scene, and this finishes your script. So basically you have four major events: entering event, ordering event, eating event, and exiting event, right? So this is basically your description of this complete script. But students, please remember, this is a semi-formal notation, and for scripts it is okay. But if you are asked, then don't represent the sentences like this. You represent them in a CD format when you talk about conceptual dependencies. But when you talk about scripts is okay because you just are more concerned with the events that are occurring and the sequence of events. So for scripts, this notation is okay. But if you talk about only conceptual dependency notation, this is not a CD representation. It's a semi-formal way. So you cannot write a CD representation like this. You have to convert it into a CD representation using normal, those 14 rules of dependencies. But for scripts, this is okay because we are not concentrating on how to convert a sentence into CD. We are just focusing on the sequence of events and answering some questions based on scripts. So for scripts, this notation is a semi-formal notation, but that is okay with us. So this was about the restaurant script. Now one question which this restaurant script can answer is, basically now we are trying to understand that what is the benefit of using scripts. Okay, so let us talk about a story. It's written that the story is, John went to a restaurant last night. Okay, he ordered steaks. When he paid for it, he noticed that he was running out of money. He hurried home since it had started to rain. So this is your story. Now, can you tell from this story that did John eat dinner last night? Can you tell from this story, did John eat dinner last night? See, nowhere it has been mentioned in this story that he ate. It's mentioned that he went to the restaurant, he ordered, he paid also. Okay, so is it mentioned explicitly that he was eating, he ate? No, nowhere it is mentioned that he was eating. So can you answer this question from your common sense? So from your common sense or from a human reasoning point of view, you can say that yes, he ate because he has ordered also, he paid also. So it's a normal sequence of events. And if somebody is ordering and then later on he is paying for it also, so the normal sequence of events would be that he has eaten also. I mean, he has ate also. Otherwise, what for he will pay? Right. So from a normal common sense, you can say that yes, he has taken dinner last night, but actually using the computer question answer or using the scripts, using the restaurant script, you can also say. So using a computer, how would you say basically? How would you infer that John ate dinner last night? How would you do that? So scripts is a very useful way for doing that. So what you do is you activate this restaurant script, and by using this restaurant script, you can say that a computer can infer that John ate dinner because this script was activated, right? And since all the events in this story correspond to the sequence of events predicted by the script, right? So the sequence of events predicted by the script are entering scene, then ordering scene, right? Then you are eating scene, then exiting scene, right? So he has entered also. So that event also occurred, which is mentioned in the story. Then he has ordered also. Then the last scene is he's paying also. That is also present. So only scene number 3, that means eating scene, is absent here. Right. So what we do is we conclude that since all the events in the story correspond to the sequence of events predicted by the script, then the program can infer that the entire sequence predicted by the script occurred normally. So thus it will conclude that John ate. Okay, because all the events are occurring normally, so it will conclude that John has taken the food also. Okay. So scripts are basically used to infer some things which are not mentioned explicitly. So scripts are, main use of scripts is that they can infer something which is they can infer something which is not some event which is not explicitly mentioned in your story. So they can infer the occurrence of implicit events also. Okay. Now one more question. Suppose you have this kind of a story. Suzanne went out to lunch. She sat down at a table and called the waitress. The waitress brought her a menu and she ordered a hamburger. So question is, why did the waitress bring Suzanne a menu? Is it written anywhere? In the story, it is written that the waitress brought her a menu. She sat down at the table and called the waitress, and the waitress brought her a menu. But why did she bring her a menu? Is it mentioned? It's not mentioned. So from our common sense, we know that what happens in a restaurant is people look at the menu and they order food. So from a common sense, you can say that waitress brought her a menu because it would help her. It would help Suzanne to order the food, right? But actually, from a computer point of view, from a computer question answering system, if you see, then how would you infer this? Basically, a computer would have two cases. The Suzanne might have asked her, because it's written she sat down at her table and called the waitress, right? So that event is mentioned here, that she called the waitress. Okay, so this answer that Suzanne asked her to do, that's why the waitress brought the menu. This answer is basically available to you when you go back in the causal chain to find out what caused the waitress to bring the menu. So if you go back in this causal chain of events, then from that previous event, you can understand that Suzanne had called the waitress. Okay, so the waitress brought her a menu. Okay, so that was by going backward. Other option is you can go forward also. So if you go forward in that sequence of events, then you will understand that Suzanne has ordered a hamburger. If you go forward in the causal chain, right? So this is the event which the action of the waitress has caused this event. Waitress brought the menu, because of that Suzanne ordered, right? So that is why Suzanne ordered, because Suzanne wanted to eat. So this waitress bringing the menu, that is the event which is causing her to eat, right? So that Suzanne could decide. So if you want to answer it like that, so that why did the waitress bring a menu? So that Suzanne could decide what she wanted to eat. So this answer is by going forward in the causal change and finding out that what event her action has enabled. So the event enabled is that Suzanne ordered a hamburger. So from that going forward also, you can understand the reason for this question. the answer for this question. So basically, if you link the sequence of events in then going backward or forward, you can get answer to your queries. So that is done through scripts, because scripts always link the events and the events form a causal chain. So from that you can basically give answers to your queries. So scripts provide a way of building a single coherent interpretation from a collection of observations. Okay, so scripts provide a way of building a understandable interpretation from a collection of unrelated observations. So what they will do, what the scripts will do, it will form a giant causal chain of events, and from that you can build a complete story, right? That story would be complete. It will not contain any uncertain information. It will not contain any incomplete information. So how the events are related to each other, that is described through a script, and that can help us in answering the questions. So here it's basically if you activate the script in a restaurant, then you will understand that what happens in an event, how the events are lived. First of all, the customer enters, then he orders. So while ordering, he asks for the menu, and then the waiter brings the menu. So then the customer orders. So those events are already present in the restaurant script. So when you see this particular answer, if you want the answer to this question, then by using that restaurant script, you can answer that, okay, this is the reason why the menu was brought. So scripts provide a single coherent interpretation from a collection of unrelated observations, so that you can answer a queries like this also. Now last query, suppose you have another story. John went to a restaurant, he was shown to his table, he ordered a large steak, he sat there and waited for a long time, and he got mad and left. Okay, so this is your story. Now can you infer from this story that John has paid the bill or not? John paid the bill or not? Can you infer? See, this is an unusual story. It's an unusual event which has occurred because it's not normally present in the script. In a restaurant script, this event is not present. That waiting for a long time and then getting mad and leaving, this kind of events is nowhere present in your restaurant script. Right. So if you refer to the restaurant script to answer this query, the important part of this story is the place where it is actually deviating from the expected sequence of events. So up till now it is okay. John went to the restaurant, he went to the table, he ordered something, he sat there. Up till this is fine. But after that, this story is deviating from the normal sequence of events. So once this sequence of normal events is interrupted, so that place at which that normal sequence of events was interrupted, up till there you can predict anything from the restaurant script, but after that you cannot predict anything from the restaurant script. Okay, so the events which are there corresponding up till ordering, those events in the restaurant script can be predicted using this restaurant script for this story, but after that you cannot predict any more events from the restaurant script. Okay, so up till ordering you can predict. So that means if you want to answer the question, John saw the menu or not. Suppose my question is John saw the menu or not. So since my ordering scene is going up till normal, so up till the normal part of this story, I can refer the restaurant script to answer the questions. So if I want to answer the question, did John see the menu? So that answer using the restaurant script would be just see the restaurant script, ordering scene. So ordering scene is completed. So that means scene 1 and scene 2, I can refer to answer questions. Okay. So from scene 2, I know that a customer, if he is ordering, then he is looking at the menu also. So that means he is seeing the menu, because that seeing the menu occurs first, and then it occurs that he is deciding the choice of food, and then he is ordering, right? So basically the sequence of events is that he is looking at the menu, then he is ordering, right? So from this scene number 2 in the restaurant script, I can actually tell that yes, John saw the menu. Okay. But if I want to answer the question, did John pay the bill? Now paying the bill occurs in the scene 4, right? Paying the bill occurs in scene 4. That means exiting scene. But actually we cannot go to scene 4 because after scene 2, the story is deviating from the normal path. So scene 3 and scene 4 will not get activated basically. So up till scene 2, you can conclude anything using this script, but after that you cannot conclude anything. So scene 3 and scene 4 events are not activated actually. Fine. So that is why the script cannot be used to predict the other events in scene 3 and scene 4. So you cannot infer that John paid the bill or not. because after ordering, no event is basically following the normal script of a restaurant. So basically, scripts focus attention on unusual events. So if it's an unusual event which has occurred, then when the sequence is deviating from the expected sequence of normal events, only up till that time you can predict the events using scripts. But once the typical sequence of events is interrupted, the script can no longer be used to predict other events. So we cannot infer that John paid the bill from here. Okay, so we should not infer actually. If we infer, that is wrong. So scripts focus our attention on unusual events, that this is an unusual event, so you cannot predict that John paid the bill. Otherwise, it will be wrong to say that John paid the bill. So scripts let us know that it is an unusual event, so we should not infer this particular answer because the script is not activated for that particular event. So we should not infer this answer that John paid the bill. So scripts also help us in focusing on unusual events and understanding that which event cannot be inferred from a particular story, so that we don't get wrong inferences. So that was the basic usage of scripts that we did it through three examples, three questions, and on the script of restaurant. So basically, some important points to summarize the scripts. We have some important points. So all scripts have entry points, right? These are the conditions which have to be met for the script to start. Okay, so scripts should be basically, we should be able to, the agent should be careful enough to select the correct script, because the preconditions of each script are different. So basically the agent should be careful to select the correct script. So given a set of facts about which conditions are present, he should be able to select the corresponding script. So the script would be selected only for which the preconditions are met. And then one more important thing is that for some scripts which are very important, we need to store the scripts in the memory. For some scripts which are not that much important or not that much needed, we can store them offline. Okay, so that means, see, for example, in the restaurant script, you had this script and there was a preparing food script embedded in this restaurant script, right? I had told you that there's another script, preparing food script, in the restaurant script, right? So this script may or may not need to be present in the main memory. So what we do is, if this script is required every time or it's a very important script for us, then we save it in the memory and we will be there, it will be there along with the restaurant script. Otherwise, we save just a pointer to this script. Okay. So the scripts which are embedded in the main script, so those scripts may be loaded at the required time only. Okay, whenever they are referred. So we just store a pointer to these scripts in the main script, and these scripts are called as fleeting scripts. So fleeting scripts are those scripts for which we just store a pointer and we don't store the complete script. So whenever the script is referred or we require it, at that time only, we just bring it to the memory. So those scripts are called as fleeting scripts, and the scripts which are important and for which we actually need them in order to solve the problem. So those scripts must always be present in the memory, and such scripts we call them as non-fleeting scripts. So non-fleeting scripts are always present along with the main script only, and some scripts are not present along with the main script and they are loaded only when needed. So those scripts are called as fleeting scripts. Okay. So for example, in your restaurant script, preparing food script will always be needed, right? Because every time a customer orders, the cook will prepare the food. So he will need the sequence of events in the prepare food script also in order to finish this script. So this is a very important script. Preparing food is the main thing, right? So that will be stored along with the main script in the memory only. So this script will be non-fleeting script. But suppose in the restaurant script, you have another script where you are basically talking about when the menu is not there on the table. So that if suppose you have another script for this condition where the menu is not on the table and the customer is asking for the menu. Suppose in the scene 2 ordering, on the top right, these sequence of events which you have written that the customer is asking for a menu. Suppose these sequence of events are there in another script. Okay, so this script may or may not be activated every time, right? Because if the menu is present on the table, then we don't need these sequence of actions, right? So in some cases only this script will be activated. the calling for the menu, that script. So that script may be just stored as a pointer inside this main script, and it will be activated only when needed. Okay, so this script would be, in this case, this particular script, which is corresponding to the sequence of events when the menu is not on the table. So this script would be called as a fleeting script, and we will store just a pointer to this script. So it will be activated only when required. So scripts should be carefully chosen to be in the memory or to not be in the memory. Okay, so if you have more scripts inside the main memory, it will waste the computing power of the agent. So we just decided very carefully that which scripts we should keep in the memory as the non-fleeting script, and which scripts we can just place a pointer. So those are the fleeting scripts. And the last thing is that different trails may be followed at any point of time according to the conditions present. Okay, so basically, if you see here, different conditions can be possible, and different branches also will be possible. So we should be able to check all the conditions. So in the scene 2, you have basically different conditions. For example, menu is there on the table, menu is not there on the table, right? Then in the scene 2, you have the food is prepared normally, or there is no food. Cook is telling that there is no food, or cook is preparing the food. So all these conditions which can occur, you should take care of them, and you should incorporate them in your scenes. So all the exception conditions you should incorporate in the scenes in order to build a complete script. So all the different branches representing the different conditions should be present inside your script in order to have a complete script. So this was all about scripts, and scripts is the most useful knowledge representation structure when the agent needs to predict some events that have not yet occurred or are not explicitly mentioned in your story. Okay, so suppose in this example, you had basically some sequence of events, but you had not mentioned explicitly that John ate. Then from the script of restaurant, you can predict that John ate. So it was an event which was not explicitly mentioned in the story, but you could predict that event that John ate through this activation of the scripts, because scene 1, scene 2 and scene 4 are occurring normally. So that means the scene in between all of them, that is scene 3, that has also occurred normally. So that's why you could predict that he ate. So that is the most important usage of scripts, that they can predict the events that have not been explicitly mentioned in your story. So this was all about script, students, and this finishes our strong slot and filler structures. The next topic is Minimax game playing algorithm. So we'll start with that. Any doubts in this one, students? Please ask if you are not clear about anything. Anything, students, you want to ask, or can we continue with the other topic? Is it okay, all of you? No doubts? Okay, fine. So then let us continue with the other thing. 1 minute. So game playing is one advanced topic for you in AI. These were all which we have done till now. They were under the basic AI. Now this topic comes under advanced AI. Okay, so we have finished all the topics of basic AI, and now we are starting with advanced artificial intelligence. So one thing is a very interesting thing here is game playing. How do we use some strategies for playing a game using AI? So these are basically AI techniques. So let's start. So if you talk about a game, so what is basically a search procedure in a game? It's a very simple procedure generally. What we do is generate and test. That is a generate and test procedure only, right? Because when you play a game, you will generate the moves in your search space, and that will be through a generator. And the tester will evaluate that whether it is the correct move for us, whether it is a correct move, and then it will select the promising move. It will select the good move basically. And like this we'll go on generating and testing until we reach a winning state, right? So basically in games we are just we are just generating the solutions or the next move for us, and then we are evaluating that move, and then we are selecting the most promising move for us, and then we are going ahead with that move. Then the opposite player does the same thing, and the game continues until one person wins or other person loses, right? So this is the games normally happen. This is how the game normally happens. But the important thing over here is that games require a large amount of domain knowledge. Okay. For example, if I'm playing chess. So in the case of chess, the average branching factor is around 35. Okay. So if you are basically on a particular position and if you want to make a move in the chessboard, then basically the branching factor would be around 35. So that means the 35 positions are possible for you to take as a next step. Okay, so in chess you have 35 positions possible for a particular player to play, and in an average each player makes 50 moves. So there are two players, black and white, and both the players may make 50 moves on an average game. Okay, so this is basically some statistics. We don't have to apply our mind that why it is 50 moves. It's basically some observations which were carried out, and it was found out that on an average a player makes 50 moves, and the branching factor, that means the number of next moves possible from a particular move, is 35. So if there are two players, then each player makes 50 moves. So if you want to examine the complete game tree, that means the complete search space of a particular chess game. So if you want to examine the complete set of moves possible in a particular chess game, then we will have to examine actually 35 to the power 50 plus 50 positions, because there are 50 moves for each player and there are two players, so 100 moves, right? And at each move the next possible moves are 35, right? So that means 35 to the power 100, that means 35 into 35 into 35, 100 times, because every player can make because total number of moves are 100 moves if you consider both the players, right? And at each move you can have 35 options. So that means how many moves? 35 into 35 into 35 up till 100 times. So that means 35 to the power 100. So that means the complete search space of a game in a chess game is 35 to the power 100 positions. Are you able to understand this? How did we get that 35 to the power 100, students? Okay, fine. So 35 to the power 100 positions you will have to examine, and that will be quite huge, right? It will be quite huge. So we generally don't do it that way. So we generally need a searching procedure. We don't exhaustively search the complete tree in order to find out that what should be the best move, because it's becoming too huge. So to improve the effectiveness of our search procedure, we need to do two things. We need to improve the generate procedure so that only good moves are generated. We are not generating all the 35 to the power 100 moves. We are not generating all of them. We generate only the good moves. And then we improve our test procedure so that the best moves are explored first. Okay. So basically, we improve the generate procedure so that only good moves are generated. And then we improve the test procedure so that the best moves are explored first. Okay. So basically, we generate only the good moves, and from those good moves, we improve our test procedure in a way that our best moves are explored first. So, thus the heuristic search procedures are needed actually, because heuristics are the search procedures which can improve choosing the best moves, right? So you can improve your generate procedure so that good moves are generated, and from those good moves you should select the best one. For that you need some kind of heuristics, right? So there are two important knowledge based components of a good game playing program. So heuristics we have to incorporate. So we have two components of a good game playing program: a plausible move generator, and the second one is a static evaluation function. Plausible move generator is what? It's used in game playing techniques. What it does, it generates a set of good moves, basically. So there is another legal move generator also. So there is another option that is called as a legal move generator. Legal move generator will generate all the legal moves. Okay, legal move generator will generate all the legal moves in a game. But we don't need all the legal moves. We need only the good moves, right? So from that, we use the plausible move generator to generate the set of good moves. Okay, so plausible move generator generates a set of good moves, right? But plausible move generator is also not a very best option, because sometimes what happens is if your branching factor is too high, then or your depth of the tree is becoming too high. For example, in the game of chess, your branching factor is too high, it is 35, right? And your depth is 100, you have to go 100 moves, like 50 for each player. So the depth is so high and branching factor is also so high in the game of chess. So plausible move generator also fails in that case. So it's possible, it's able to generate only up till 10 or 20 moves, but after that it is not able to it's not basically able to generate the good moves. So it's because the size of the game tree or your size of the search space is becoming huge when you go further up in the moves, because it's 35 to the power 100, right? So what it does is, in order to generate the good moves, it has to see that what options are better. So up till 10 or 20 moves it can go fine, but it is not possible to search until the goal state is reached, because that will be like, in order to generate the good moves, it has to scan through those 100 moves, right? And then it has to see that what option is good out of those 35 options at each move, right? So if your depth is too high or branching factor is too high, that then even with a good plausible move generator, it is not possible to search until the goal state is reached. So it will go up till 10 or 20 moves correctly, but up till not the 100 moves. So moves are also called as ply. In game playing, we call them as ply, the moves. Okay, moves are also called as ply. So then we use the heuristics. Okay, so plausible move generator improves the generate procedure so that only good moves are generated, but it fails in the case of a very high branching factor and if the depth of the tree is becoming too high. So then we try to improve our test procedure also. So for improving the test procedure, we use certain kind of heuristics. So that heuristic function is called as a static evaluation function. So static evaluation function is basically a function which is a heuristic function which will improve the performance of your test procedure also, so that your most good, so that your best moves are chosen. Okay, so it will evaluate the individual board positions and it will see that how likely you are to win that particular game, and then it will assign a particular score, and then from that scores you will choose the maximum scoring position, and then you will go on to get that position as the next position from the current position. So static evaluation function works like a heuristic function and it applies to your test function to improve the test function. So that your individual board positions are evaluated, and then we are able to find out that which position is more likely to lead to a winning state, and we are able to choose that best move. So static evaluation function improves your test procedure. Plausible move generator improves your generate procedure. So if you use a combination of both of these components, you get a overall performance improvement. Okay. So these are the two knowledge-based components. We call them as a knowledge-based components of a good game playing program. First is plausible move generator and second is static evaluation function. So plausible move generator improves the generate process and static evaluation function improves the test process. Now, basically the plausible move generator and static evaluation functions, both of them need a large amount of domain knowledge to work. Right, so both of them need a large amount of domain knowledge, because you need to know that what are the legal moves, then what are the legal moves, so that only you can generate. So that requires domain knowledge, right? And then you also need to know that what are the different next options available, like the next moves available. So you need to know that what are the 35 next moves possible, and from that only you will choose the good moves, right? So basically that next moves possible will also require a lot of domain knowledge in order to select the options, that what are the 35 options for us. So both of these techniques require a large amount of domain knowledge. So what we do is we augment them with a search procedure which can actually have some more benefit. So what that search procedure's benefit is, that search procedure is basically called as a minimax algorithm, minimax searching algorithm. So minimax searching algorithm, it has got a one important advantage. That advantage is that this algorithm can look ahead some moves further to see what may occur. And accordingly, it will decide that what next move I should choose. Okay, so this minimax search is got a very important advantage that it can look ahead some moves further to see what may occur as a result of the next move, and then accordingly, just by choosing the result of its choice, it selects the choice. Basically, it looks ahead some moves further to see what will occur if it decides this particular move, and then depending upon the result, it selects the move. Okay, so we will see that thing also, that how minimax search actually works. So basically, minimax search augments this plausible move generator and static evaluation function. It uses both of them, and it also complements them with its own look ahead strategy also. So we will see what is minimax search algorithm. So we'll start with the minimax search algorithm, and I'll give you an introduction, and I'll describe that in the 2 o'clock class. Okay. Divya, can you take the attendance? Done. Okay, Divya, have you taken yesterday's attendance also, Divya, for that half an hour class? Or otherwise, maybe you can take it today and give it. Okay, fine, no problem. If you have not taken yesterday, then you can take at 2 o'clock, and you can, okay, no problem. So you can take at today 2 o'clock, and then you can email me 2 attendances. One is this one, other will be at 2 o'clock attendance. So that 2 o'clock attendance will count for yesterday. Okay, fine. Okay, students, will continue at 2 o'clock with this. Thank you, all of you. Thank you. Okay, thank you.